Hey, Aaron Rabinowitz here for thepixellab.net, and I'm super excited to show off Unreal Mutating Materials Wood Edition, a new library of over 250 wood materials for Unreal Engine 5 and up. Not only is the quality of these woods at a level unseen in Unreal Engine until now, but also each material has several mutations that is varying degrees of age and decline. And along with a system for customized damage, this is easily the largest, most flexible wood material library for Unreal that you'll find anywhere. Okay, so let's jump into it and see how these materials work. Now, if you've used any of our other materials for Unreal, then you're going to be familiar with a lot of this stuff, but let's run through it all anyway. And there's still plenty to show off, even if you've used a ton of our stuff. So let's take a look here. And the first thing we want to do is import these materials into our project. So assuming that you've downloaded everything and you've unzipped it, you'll find that you have this folder called PLMM-Wood, and inside of that, you'll see a content folder, and inside of that, you're going to find our Mutating Materials Wood. Now, I have a project right here. This is the project I'm in right now, and I'm in the content folder, and that's really important. And you're going to take what's right here, and you're either going to drag it, or you're going to copy it and paste it. So I'm just going to drag it right over and move it into the content folder, and you can see it's been added right here, and it's just ready to go. You may at this point need to restart, so let's take a look. I might need to do that. If I jump into the Wood, you see like the folder showed up, but it's not registering. So at this point, what I would say is let's restart the project, and once we do that, everything will be in where it needs to be. Okay, so now we're back, and if we scroll down the folder for Wood, we'll see that these folders are now showing up and we've got different things inside of them. First is the material functions. You'll generally speaking want to leave these alone. These are certain functions that the materials call to help them work the way they should. Just let them be. Then within that, we have our materials, and we've got our master materials, which are 5 different types of material that the rest of the materials are based on. And you're going to want to leave these alone generally. There's a couple occasions where you might want to get in and mess with it, but if you touch one of these master materials and you make a change to it, that change will affect every material that is based on these materials. So generally you want to leave them alone. Then we've got within that folder, we have damaged and mixed woods. These are really powerful, and we'll go through these in a little bit. And then we have things like African mahogany, American cherry. And within each of these, you'll find that there's different versions of this. There's parquet, and there's things like herringbone, which is different kinds of ways of arranging the wood in the wood that's on the floor, on the walls. And then we have things like raw wood, which I absolutely love, and then damaged, rotten, things like that. So you'll kind of run through it, and we've got all of these materials in different states of decay. And you can run through all of these and see what they are, and I'll touch on many of them as we go, but I want to jump into the last part here, which is we've got the Megascan examples. A couple of places where we're using things like our surfaces are, like we have fingerprints or scratches and things like that, or wipes, which we're using for different things. And these are just different kinds of textures that we're going to work with over time. And then finally, we actually have our textures that everything is based on, including the Blemish Pro. These are awesome. Blemish Pro from the Pixel Lab includes all kinds of different blemishes that we can use to create all kinds of effects, scratches, and again, fingerprints and all sorts of different stuff. And they are used in the materials, and they're really important. And then you'll see we've got all of the different textures that make up each material. And generally, if you're just working with the regular materials, you're not going to touch these. But when you start working with the mixed materials, you're going to want to come in and grab different textures from here and use them to mix the materials together. And I'll show you how all of that works. So let's start with some basic stuff, just applying the materials and then tweaking them to be what we want them to be. I'm going to start with this material right here called B-Plank. And this is beach plank, and I'm going to copy it. I just like to drag it and then copy here, and then at the end here, I'm just going to rename it because I don't want to get it confused. And I'll put that as ZZZ at the beginning. I always like to do that to keep it at the end of the list. And there it is. And then I'm just going to drop this on the wall here. And that's really cool. I mean, it's like really amazing how fast. I'm just going to drop this in a couple of places and see, what that looks like. And onto this door. And, one thing I can see is I like the way it looks, but I do want it to, it's a little too big, the material. So I'm going to jump into here and double click to open it up. And I'm going to look at it. We've got our texture scaling. And I'm going to set this to 2. Let's see how that looks. I feel like that's already looking much better. And yeah, it looks pretty good. And then I'm going to do something similar with a darker wood. When we come down to, let's see, we've got brown hickory, which I like, or even Honduran mahogany. That's a really great material. And we'll use this HM plank, and I'm just going to copy it. And again, do the same thing with the name. And then I'm just going to drop it on right here. And again, I'm just going to jump in and change the size of it. Go to texture scaling, set it to 2. And I think that's looking pretty good. And I'm just going to drag it into a couple of other places that I think we should do it. So we can go over to here. Like there's a spot right there. And over here. And already this is looking great. Finally, I'd like to do the floor here. So I'm going to grab something. We'll come back to our material here, which is, what did we have? We chose the plank, the beach plank. So I'm going to come up back to beach, and I want to get something that's fairly similar. Try the floor and beach. We'll see if that looks good. And we can go with, why don't we go with parquet? And I'm just going to drop this down right here. And I can see again that that is also too big. So let me just duplicate this material again, copy here, just jump down. And again, rename it. And take this and drop it onto the floor again and jump into the material. And I'm going to scale this maybe to, let's see if 2 works. I feel like we should go higher even. Let's go with 4. And we can see, you know, the floor is looking much better now. That's pretty good. Here, let me minimize that. It's looking pretty good. And, you know, we can, again, tweak all of this stuff and tweak the lighting, and we need to put wood on the chairs, but you can already see how fast and easy it is to set this up. So now let's dive a little deeper into the materials. I'm going to take this Honey Beach plank smudged. I'm going to copy it right here. And again, just rename it. And then I'm going to drag it and drop it right onto the chair. And that already looks really good. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can look at this material a little bit better. And, you know, this is smudged, so you can see how the light is reacting. Let me see if I turn off my light bank. You can really see that the way the light is reacting, we get a nice, like, smudgy look. If I were to use, like, let's say the plank, just the regular plank, and I'll go right here, Honey Beach plank, you can see that there is a subtle difference in the way that the light is reacting and being smudged. So let me get in there again, and you can see how it's kind of being diffused a little more. Now, if you find that it's still too shiny, and you might, in this case, I don't think it is, and part of that is because, I'm going to turn off my light bank here, but we can see the shine a little bit more here. And if you find that it's shiny, a little too shiny, let's just jump into this material again, and we'll come here, and what we'll do is there's a less shine property right here, and this will tighten up the shininess of certain areas. So you can see that we have now that shine is being diffused in some areas a lot more, and here it's kind of just still shiny. So again, we can do this, and let's turn my light bank back on, and you know, you can see that there's definitely less shine on some of these areas. If I pull in really tight and I add a little light and I just kind of play with the exposure a little bit, and then I just lower the amount of shine, you can really see how this will affect the material. So basically, areas that were shiny before are being tightened up so that only the most shiny areas are visible with shine. And now let's look at all the features inside the material, starting with the color. Basically, the way that this works is you've got a color map, and the strength of that color map can be pulled out if you want to have less of that. You can also desaturate it. So, you know, more and more wood is being stained gray these days. And so, like, if you wanted to kind of push it more into the grays, that's a great way to do that. Or, you know, even after you've done that, if you wanted to tint it into another color, you know, you can start to do that as well. That's pretty gross. I'm going to cancel that out. And I'm going to set the desaturation back to 0. And then again, we've got these properties like roughness, so we can minimize the roughness, or we can make the roughness minimum really high, or I can just completely take out the roughness entirely, and you see how shiny that's going to be. Not very good looking though. Let me reset that. And we've got our normal map. You can crank up the normals or bring them down. You can go up to really high if you want, which will really, as you can see here, bring that up. Although in this case, I don't think it's necessary. Bring that back. And then there's other properties like metallic and specular that you can play with. Emissive is basically like if it's in a lot of shadow and you want to bring it out a little more. This is not to like make a glowing material, but it's just to like when things get so dark you can't really see it, you can just crank it up just a little bit. We also have ambient occlusion, which if we bring it up here, right here, you can see that we've got these creases, so it adds in a little bit of extra sort of shadow in these areas, but this is really extreme. I think you're not going to be using this too much, but I just want you to know it's there. And then, and I think this is really cool, is we have things like fingerprints and scratches. And, you know, for that, I'm going to bring in the plank, the regular plank material, and maybe even go to a different material. Let's go with black walnut and something like black walnut plank. which maybe has a little more shine to it. And I'm going to go in here, and on the black walnut plank, I'm just going to add in some fingerprints. So let's do this. Bring in our fingerprints. And you can see the fingerprints in that shiny area. So now there's fingerprints on there. You can scale this map out a little bit. So let's say we scale this out to make it smaller or bigger. And we also have things like scratches. And we can come into the scratches right here, and we have two different kinds of scratch maps. We have the kind that we might use from the Pixel Lab, and that one's right here, so we can see it right here. We can also change it to use a Quixel scratch map, and in that case, it will switch it to one of the other maps. But let's just go here with the one we've got, and we can invert the scratch map if we want to, which in this case doesn't really help us too much. But we can brighten it up so we get stronger scratches. We can also bring up the contrast and again play with the brightness and the contrast, and you can see that we get lots of little scratches here on the material. And I'm just going to come back to this material right here, and I'm just going to scale the texture to 2 just to help us see things a little bit better. And let me minimize this for a moment. Go back to my target here that I'm working with and just bring it a little bit over to here so we can get really tight. And here's where you can see all these scratches that we've added in. Now, if you want real damage, we have damage materials, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Coming down just a little bit further, we also have dirt. So if you want to add in some dirt material here, it just basically makes the thing a little bit dirtier, and we can bring up the normal intensity for the dirt as well, although I don't think you really need to do that in most cases. I would leave it where it was. And you can bring up the dirt strength. Right now it's set to 1. We can go to 2 even, and we can raise the contrast so that if we bring up the brightness and lower the contrast, we just get some more isolated areas of that dirt. All in all, this is a great way to sort of just play with the look of the material and make it wear and tear. And that's aside from the fact that we already have this, we have plank dirty, which already has its own dirt in it. We have plank raw, which is like an unfinished wood. And we've got rotten, which really looks kind of gross, but it's kind of the material over time has really decayed. And so that's the basics of these materials. Now let's look at the painted wood materials. So I'm going to work on that with the wall. Let me just make this invisible for now. We don't need to see this. And I've already got a painted material applied, but we'll start from scratch here. Why don't we take multi-plank painted clean, and I'm going to just kind of copy this. And like I usually do, just put the Z's in there, and then I'm just going to apply it to the wall here. And I can see that obviously that texture is way too big. So double click to open it up. And I'll just scale this down to something like, why don't we go with 6 and see how that looks, maybe even 10. And that looks better. And then let's go over to the paint tint, and we can change the paint color to something else we want to do. Let's go with, for now, just blue for the point of just showing it off. And I want to point out here that there's actually, what you can see here is that there's 2 different materials working together. There's wood, and it's underneath the paint. And then there's the paint. So we got a paint texture, right? A color map. And then we have this tint for the paint. And then we have the wood. This is the roughness map, and this is the paint roughness map. And you're wondering, why would we have these maps if we can't see the wood underneath it? Well, you can, depending on the settings. If we come down over to here, we can see that we have a paint mask. And right now it's using this white image to be the mask. And in that case, we can't really see the material beneath it. So what I'm going to do is go into the textures, and we'll just come down over here. I'm just going to go into this look right here. We'll go over to our textures, and I'm looking for the painted wood ones right here. And you'll see at the top, we've got this paint peeling masks. And if we go in here and we take this paint mask, let's say we choose this one, it's peeling heavy. That you can see we suddenly have a mask that's peeling, and we can work with the transparency and how strong that is. We can tighten things up on that. We can raise the contrast of the map so that here. So if we lower this down, you can see that the contrast kind of lets some of it through and some of it not. So we can work with the different levels of these different kinds of peeling. So we could take one of these other ones, like in this case, we're going with, right now we're using the heavy one. We can take the moderate damage one and drop that over there. And you can see that we can use the paint mask brightness to control how much of this shows through. We can also invert the paint mask so that we get less damage and a little bit of the wood showing through. And again, we can also add in the dirt if we want to make it a little dirty, and play with those settings until we get something we like. Next, let's look at the painted wood raw category. It's actually one of my favorites, not because it's so much better than any of the other ones, but it has a certain playfulness, and it's an idea that I came up with when I was working on my animated short called Star Wars: The Woodcut, and I wanted to have some elements that were painted, but I didn't want everything to look like it was really slick. I wanted it to look like a kid had kind of done this. And so what we've got here are different raw woods, and you can find the basic raw woods in each of their categories. So if I go to Honey Beach, for example, you can see that there's a plank raw, and this is just the raw wood that doesn't have a finish on it. And over here, what we've done in the painted wood raw is we've added in the ability to paint on top of it. And the paint is not slick like the last paint we had set up. This is paint that looks like a kid did it. So basically what I'll do is take this PR ash, this is painted wood raw ash, and I'm going to drop it onto our monkeys here. And you can already see that like it's kind of messy, and I really just love it. It's a lot of fun. And you know, if we want to get in there just to work with it, I'll just show you how these work. So obviously you can change the paint color to something else. We can change that to maybe we want more of a brown color like this. And then we might want to look at something like the paint mask. And so we'll take a look here, and you can see we have a paint mask, and right now it's using one of these from Quixel Megascan, but I can also go into my Blemish Pro maps that we've got here, and I can take this one called Rough 10, and I can just drop that over there. And what we do is we just want to work with some of the transparencies here. So we might want to kind of lower the brightness of the mask, and then even play with the contrast a little bit. And what we end up with is something that looks like it's been hand painted, and the wood kind of comes through. It's not fully there, but you can see that there's wood underneath it. And I really love the way that this looks. And then from there, what I would do is for the rest of the stuff, I would go, let's say, back to ash here. Why don't we grab that ash, and we'll get ash plank, or even ash plank worn, and drop that over here. And, you know, you get some nice looking, like raw, more like homemade kinds of products and things like that that look like a lot of fun. Next, let's look at the bark materials, and there's a bunch of them, and what's even cooler is that they have usually like a parallel of themselves along with one that's covered in moss. So for example, this one right here, Bark Ash 02, if I drop that on there, that looks like that, but if I take Bark Ash 02 Mossy, it looks the same except moss has been added on top of it. So I really love that you can do that. Now, there is one feature in here that makes this interesting and unique from the rest of the materials, and if we scroll down, all the way down, we can see that we have something here called UV scrambling. And this is something we started with our terrains materials, but basically if you want to mix up the material so that it doesn't feel like it's repeating, and this is important because either maybe you're going to have multiple trees in your project and you don't want them to all look the same, right? So if we pull in here and we start working with the scrambler, right? So we can scramble the material a little bit so that it will end up not repeating, and we can do a second scrambler here if we need to. And so you end up with just differences and variances in the way that it looks so that it doesn't look the same each time. Now, there's one other material set that uses the same thing, the UV scrambler. And although it won't look right on the tree, let's just take a look at it. And this one's going to be our particle wood, right? So if we come down to particle board right here, and we just add in this plank one. And you've seen like wood that's very raw, that's like unfinished and doesn't have any covers on it. You've seen wood that looks like this. And basically what we'll do is we'll just kind of go into the material again, like we just did. And if you scroll down here, you can see that we've got the UV scrambling, and we can turn that on. And again, we can even use things like dirt and make it messy and dirty and all these things. So there's lots of great features in these materials that will help you mix things up and help you keep things from repeating. But I just wanted you to see how the UV scrambling worked and how it can help you. You may be wondering why we're not using it in the other wood, just because it wouldn't look good and it wouldn't make sense. But here with particle board and also with bark, where there's a lot more of an organic breakup to the wood, then it makes sense to use these kinds of things. Finally, let's look at our damaged and mixed woods. And the goal in creating this category wasn't to come up with every solution that you'll need, but rather to create a bunch of examples and that you can build from yourself. And so first, let me show you how they work, and then we'll talk about how to just make them on your own. So what we've got here is, let's take, for example, this mix of clean and worn. If I drop it on there, and I've got to jump in, and I need to make that texture scaling a bit higher, so we'll go to 5, maybe even 6, and you can see that there's a mix of wood that looks good. And we've got this, here, I'll pull this out a little bit. We've got the standard parquet, and then we've got parquet worn. And what we've got here are two kinds of mixers. So pull down a little bit lower here, and you'll see that we've got something called the damage mixer and the fractal mixer. In this example, we have the fractal mixer turned on, but the damage mixer turned off. If I turn on the damage mixer, I'm not sure if we'll fully see it. Let's come back to that one in a little bit. But we'll work with the fractal mixer right now, and you can see that we've got the ability to invert the fractal, right? We've got this fractal, and here, let's work with the range minimum. You can see that we can spread it out, make it bigger, make it smaller. We can work with the range maximum, and we can also work with the hardness of that, so that if we pull in tight, you can see how tight this transition is. I'm just going to undo that, and that's a lot looser and looking a lot more natural. We can change the fractal seed, and we can also add in a second fractal, and we can play with the fractal scaling for that. Because you get little bits and pieces, however we want to do this. And we could also look at something like our deeply scratched version of this material. So basically, this is a very, obviously we need to scale this out, right? So I'm just going to jump into this material right here. I'm going to scale this texture again up to something like 6. And then I'm going to go down to the scratches, to the damage map. We'll come a little bit further down. So we got the damage mixer right here. And I'm going to bring the damage scaling up to also to 6. And you can see that we've got this damage map, which is kind of using the same stuff that we've used before, the scratches that we were looking at earlier, but they're using them in a different way. These are being used as a mask to reveal another kind of wood below it. So if we take a look up here, you can see we've got our quality wood, the one on top, and then the wood beneath it that's being revealed. And here I'm just using one of the raw woods underneath it so that it really looks damaged and unfinished. But coming back down here, what we can see is we can choose between this kind of map, a black and white one, or a Quixel imperfection map. And the main difference is just that the Quixel imperfection map uses the red channel of the image. So that's where we get the damage from. Whereas a non-Quixel imperfection map will use just the RGB, the black and white, all of it to create the damage. And we can play with the damage mask brightness, which obviously you can see like brings up the points that are even the gray ones into much more white. And we can also play with the contrast to tighten that up a bit so that we get just very bright areas and almost no gray areas in the black and white image. And then we can also play with the damage normal intensity. We could really crank that up if we want, or we can just bring it down to nothing. Now, something worth noting here is if I go into my heavy damage version right here, this is super heavy damage. And here I'm going to, again, just quickly scale the materials so we can see them right. So I'll set this to 5. I'll set the damage down to 5 as well. So let me bring this down over here. We'll set the fractal scaling. Let's bring this actually, I think this is good, but we'll bring it up a little bit more. And I'm coming up to the damage a little higher here. And I'm going to set the damage scaling really high so that we get this smaller damage. And I love this because it's super flexible. If we come to the fractal mixer and we play with fractal scaling or we play with the range, I mean, I love that you can just sort of like dissolve the wood at the top level there. And I think it looks really cool, but I do want to mention that when you enable this feature right here called Use Fractal Normals, it can slow things down a little bit. It's actually doing a lot of processing to use this sort of procedural fractal generator and then turning that into a normal map. Just know that it may slow things down in the changing of it. I've found it plays pretty smoothly, but if you're getting really bad results there in terms of speed, you can always turn it off and not worry about using the normals, and that might help you. Now, as far as making your own, probably the safest way to do this is to pick one that you want to base it on. And you can really start with any of these. But let's say we go with Deeply Scratched right here. And I'm just going to make a copy of it. I'll just copy here. I'm going to rename this to ZZZ. And then I'm just going to drop it on here. And I'm going to make some changes. So hopping into it, let's start with the basics here of the texture scaling. I'll set that to 6. I'll come down here again and I'll work with the damage scaling right here. So again, we'll set this up to something like 6 as well. And let's say I want the wood on top to be different. So what I could do is come into our textures and then find the wood that I'd like to use. Right now we're using American Cherry. So I might start with something like, let's come down to Brown Beech. And what I would do is I'd have to come into each of these categories and find the one I want to use. So let's say we went with the Brown Beech Parquet. Let's go with Dirty right here. And then I come up over here to the materials, right, where you see color map A, and I'll just swap these out. So first I'll do that. Then I'll move down to the roughness map, which is going to be this one right here. And then I'm going to come down to the normals map and drop that one over there. And that's pretty much what I need to do unless I want to use the ambient occlusion, which in this case I don't. And maybe I want to change out this other material, right? So like I'll come back here. Let's use the raw version of this as well. So we'll go to Plank Raw right here. And this is going to look a bit different. So I'll take this one right here, just like this. And I'll take the roughness map. I'll drop that on there. Come down over to the normal map, drop that over there. And then I'm just going to come down to the damage map, and we can try using, playing with the damage mask a bit and just kind of creating this look. And I probably, in this case, I'm going to set my damage normals right here. I'm going to set that down to 0. I don't feel like I need to have the normals there. So what we get is this very scratched looking wood. And I think it looks really great. Like, it's just such a great sort of effect of damaging the wood, and it doesn't cost much to do it in terms of the processing power. I think it's looking pretty solid. Now, something important to know is that sometimes you're going to apply a material to an object and it's not going to look right? And it has to do with the UV mapping of the object. So in this case, I've got some text and it looks good on the front, but on the side, we can see that it's being stretched and squished, and we don't want that. So if we go into the material itself and we go all the way down to the bottom right here, you'll see that there's an option here that's turned on by default called Use Object UVs. And if you turn this off, what you end up with is using triplanar projection. And at first, it might not look right because it's so much bigger. But if we come back over here and we just scale the texture, we can see how much more even this effect is and how much the texture is evenly being distributed across this object. So that's something that might help you if you get a bad result when applying the material. For the final piece of this tutorial, I approached this with a little bit of nervousness because, this is dealing with an experimental feature and your mileage may vary. And so let's take a look at the master material for wood. And I'm working in 5.2 right now, and we're going to move over to 5.3 for Unreal Engine. So I go into the hierarchy and I go to MM Wood Master. What I can see is that right now displacement is being connected to something called World Position Offset. And there is no displacement option here in the material. And that's just because up until 5.3, they didn't really offer this. But now let's look in 5.3. So here I am in Unreal Engine 5.3, and here's the thing. To get nanite displacement to work properly, there's a lot of steps you have to go through, and I'm not going to outline them here. But let's assume that you've done everything that you're supposed to do, and now you want to get your object to displace. So a couple of things have to happen. First is, here, let me get into this material right here, and we're in the material that's been applied to this flat plane, and I'm going to go into the master material. So I'm going to go to Hierarchy, Wood Master. And when I come in, what I'm going to see is if I move over to here, you're going to see, here, let me move this out just a little bit. You'll see that our displacement is currently hooked up to World Position Offset, but assuming that you've done all the things you need to do to set up nanite displacement in Unreal Engine 5.3, and that is a tutorial in and of itself, but let's assume you've done it, you can grab hold by hitting Control and reconnecting this World Position Offset, this displacement here, and moving it to this new category displacement that will show up once you've set everything up properly. And that involves editing the INI file and adding some stuff into the console command stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff you have to do. But assuming that you've done it, you're going to save this material. Okay, and there's probably one other thing you're going to want to do here, and that's just come in here, select the master material setting right here, and coming down here, I've got the magnitude up high. By default, it's something set to 4. I would set it up, higher just to see a result. Let's set it to 100. You can always change that back, but again, save what you've got. And I'm going to minimize this, and there's one other thing we have to do, which is to make sure that our object has been made nanite ready. And so we are going to select the object and come down right here to where it says static mesh, and we're going to double click to open that. And right here where it says nanite settings, we're going to go to enable nanite support. And once I've enabled nanite support, I'm going to close this out. It's going to ask me if I want to save the level of detail changes to the plane. I'm going to choose yes. And then I'm going to go into my material that's already been applied here. And let's try this and hope it works because this is an experimental feature. And I'm going to turn on displacement. And yeah, it's working. It's not working the way necessarily you would expect. But now from here, I'm going to come down to displacement strength. I'm going to crank this up. And you can see that we're getting displacement. And it creates a lot of detail And, you know, look, wood, this kind of wood may not be the best use of it, you know, but you can see how this works. Maybe we'll try something like this. Let's try this one right here. And we'll turn on displacement for it. Come down over here, turn on displacement, and we'll crank the displacement up a bit. And here you can see a little better. You can see how the wood is now kind of bending in the little grooves that it had. You know, again, this is a very experimental feature, and there's a whole bunch of stuff you have to do to make this work. But hopefully now you understand that it does work and that you need to switch the pins from world position offset to displacement. Anyway, that was a really long tutorial, I know. I wanted to make sure you guys had everything you needed to use this product to the best of its ability and to the best of your ability. And so, as always, I hope that it helps you in your work. If you're looking for more Unreal materials and other products for Unreal, head over to the Pixel Lab and you can see a lot of great stuff there. Once again, I'm Alan Rabinowitz for thepixellab.net. I'll see you soon.